People will tell you that Macbeth is a play about how political ambition drives people to violence and dysfunction, and that may be true. But Macbeth is also a play about dinner parties that go very, very badly. Just like this is a video that is partly about sinister hospitality in Macbeth, but also is a video about how I'm afraid to open corked beverages. Oh my God, I'm gonna put my goddamn eye out. Talk about hospitality gone badly wrong. This is about to end in disaster. Holy shit, this is so pressurized. I'm terrified. You're gonna catch my death on camera. Oh my God. Woo! Hospitality is everywhere, kind of casually, in our day-to-day lives. Hospitality industry, having the girls over for drinks, holiday dinners with the extended families. And it's everywhere also in narrative. Pride and Prejudice is a book about people visiting each other's houses. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or any narrative about vampires for that matter, places a lot of importance on invitation into the home. The Hobbit is a story about a guy who entertains a bunch of guests one night and then has to go confront a dragon as a result. That's why none of us open the door to strangers. We are constantly engaging with hospitality in storytelling and in life, but most of us tend not to think deeply or critically about what it means to participate in hospitality, which makes sense because you don't need to analyze it in order to do it. But when you do take the time to think in more depth about hospitality, to question what values and connections are involved, what expectations, what forms of labor and power, things get really interesting. And often they get a little bit sinister. I could sit here and talk until I drop down from exhaustion or I empty out the bottle of Lambrusco, whichever comes first, about hospitality in early modern English life and literature. But for all of our sakes, I will limit myself today, for now, to talking about hospitality in Macbeth, which of all Shakespeare's plays is probably the most about hospitality, except for maybe Timon of Athens, but nobody really cares about Timon of Athens. And there's no Lady Macbeth in Timon of Athens, so it's just not nearly as much fun. So we'll do Macbeth, okay? So get comfortable, because even though this is the short version of this, I've got a feeling we're gonna be here for a while. If it's been a while since you encountered this play, we'll start with a very brief refresher of what happens in Macbeth. As a side note, it's only a superstition to not call Macbeth by its name if you are actually in a theater, and as much as I do use my home office for theatrical purpose here, I think I should be safe so I don't have to call it the Scottish play. But we'll find out if I'm jinxing myself. Our opening context for this play is that Duncan, the King of Scotland, has recently been dealing with some rebellions in his kingdom that have been started by the Thane of Cawdor. And when we open, those rebellions have been squashed due largely to the work of Macbeth and Banquo. Macbeth and Banquo are wandering in the woods after one of the last battles has concluded, and there they encounter 3 witches who prophesy to them what their future will hold. They tell Banquo that he will father kings, but will not himself be a king, while they tell Macbeth that he is now Thane of Cawdor and will also himself someday be king. And so when a messenger from King Duncan comes in immediately after this and greets Macbeth by the title Thane of Cawdor, Macbeth thinks to himself, oh my God, if they're right about that, they're probably right about everything else also, and I'm gonna be the king. Macbeth sends off a letter to his wife, my close personal friend, Lady Macbeth, to let her know what the witches said, and immediately after she receives that letter, she receives message that the king is coming to stay at her house that very night, and to her that means only one thing, that while Duncan is a guest in their home, she and Macbeth will just have to kill him. And so they do. They kill King Duncan in his sleep. Macbeth becomes king. Lots of other stuff goes down. Highlights include Macbeth becoming threatened by Banquo and arranging to have him killed, and then Banquo's ghost shows up at a dinner party, and then Macbeth goes kind of publicly insane, and then he decides that he needs to kill the children of one of his uprising lords, Macduff, and so he kills Macduff's wife and young kid, which, while sad, dead kids are sad, does lead us to the objectively hilarious line, "What, you egg?" Stage direction, stabbing him. Anyway, there's another prophecy from the witches. It turns out that Macbeth can only be killed by a man who was not of woman born, but it turns out the loophole there is a C-section. Macduff was born from a C-section, so he can kill Macbeth, and he does, and then the monarchy is restored. Hooray! Now, within those 5 acts of chaos, 2 of the moments that serve most to push the action forward and to give us insight into Lady and Mr. Macbeth's psychology occur within moments of hospitality at dinner parties. The early moment in Act 1, when King Duncan is a guest within the Macbeth home and they kill him, and then later, around the midway point in Act 3, when the ghost of Banquo shows up and disrupts King Macbeth's banquet. In this video, we're going to look at those 2, but also a lot of other moments in the play, and for each narrative moment, I'm going to try to bring in a slightly different perspective to help us understand what's happening in hospitality in that particular moment. We're going to look at literary criticism, theory, historical perspectives, all focused around hospitality, all illustrated through moments in Macbeth. And we'll start with Act 1, Scene 4, which is the moment when King Duncan informs Macbeth that he and his entire company will be headed to Inverness, the Macbeth home, with really no asking for permission and no time to prepare. Before any of the murders take place, before hospitality gets really explicitly twisted and sinister, the play, in my opinion, directs us to take notice of how there is just a normal degree of strain and stress involved in hospitality. Duncan tells Macbeth, okay, we're all gonna head to your house now. Macbeth tells Duncan, the rest is labor, which is not used for you. I'll be myself the harbinger and make joyful the hearing of my wife with your approach. And then he leaves to go tell his wife, and Duncan says that his kind words are a banquet to him, that in his commendations I am fed, which is all very nice, except it's not compliments that are going to serve as the banquet for Duncan. There will have to be an actual banquet, and it will be a lot of labor to prepare this banquet. And do we really think that Macbeth is going to make Lady Macbeth joyful with the news that this massive company of people is about to arrive in her home? Or do we think that she's going to be running around going, get rid of the couches, we can't let them know that we sit down, you know? What we have to understand about this scene is that in early modern England, hosting the monarch was a very high stakes event, which I know, obviously, but seriously, it was a whole thing. There was a practice at the time called the royal progress, in which the monarch and members of their court would travel around the country basically and make a tour, stopping in select homes of the nobility and the gentry along the way. In preparation for the visit of the monarch during these progresses, the household, often overseen by the lady of the house, the Lady Macbeth of any given estate, would have to spend a lot of time and money getting ready. And this would include things, obviously, like just cleaning the sheets in the rooms and making sure everything looked nice and stocking up on provisions, but also would involve hiring entertainers, commissioning for entirely new music and dramatic performances to be written, sometimes even writing those performances yourself as the lady or the lord of the house, sometimes performing in them yourself also. It would involve sometimes altering physically the house, adding a new entry gate, adding new additions to the grounds and the gardens in order to impress the monarch and fit into whatever entertainments you had planned. And obviously none of that would be expected in a spur-of-the-moment visit like what Duncan is planning here. But the fact remains that hospitality between the nobility and the monarch was an extremely high-stakes event, and one in which the hosting nobility was expected to prove their loyalty and their love through extravagant feasting and entertainment. Ben Jonson's poem To Penshurst contains this little anecdote of an impromptu visit from the monarch to the home of a nobility. King James is out hunting with his son Charles, and he happens across the home of the Sidneys, headed by Lady Barbara Sidney, although she isn't mentioned by name in the poem. But the king is kind of lost and in need of shelter, and the poem highlights the fact that Lady Sidney's constant preparation makes her home this beacon of hospitality, and it draws the commendation of the king in this moment. So even without the expectation of the monarch's arrival, just being in a constant state of readiness for the potential arrival of the monarch was seen as something that could lead to immense social and political advantage. And the inverse is also true. If you don't perform well as the host of the monarch, things could go very badly for you. There is one kind of infamous historical anecdote about hospitality gone very wrong, which is an instance in which Queen Elizabeth was on progress, and in one of the homes she stayed at, she found that her host was a secret Catholic, and so she threw him in prison because of it and kind of booted him out of his own house. So, worst case scenario in hosting the monarch, you go to jail. Best case scenario, you get some political capital out of it. It's early modern English networking, kind of. There's this tiny moment in Act 1, Scene 5 that I love, in which Lady Macbeth receives the news that Duncan is arriving that very night. She's just read the letter from Macbeth about the witch's prophecy, and she's kind of stewing on that, and a king's messenger comes in, and he says, quote, "The king comes here tonight." And her response is, quote, "Thou art mad to say it. Is not thy master with him, who, were it so, would have informed for preparation? You're crazy. There's no way the king is coming. My husband would have told me so that I could have started working to get things ready." There's this one critical analysis of this scene that I worked with quite a bit, written by James Heffernan, and in it he describes Lady Macbeth as, in this moment, acting as a put-upon hostess, and that phrasing always sticks with me because it just feels so true to me, that even though she's already scheming and she's got violence and, potential regicide, definitely rebellion in mind, that she, in this moment, is just running a house and finding out that she's about to have a lot of people over for dinner and she is not ready for it at all. But even though that might be her first reaction, her second one, once the messenger leaves, is to say, "The raven himself is hoarse, that croaks the fatal entrance of Duncan under my battlements." So she goes pretty quickly from, "Oh my God, what am I gonna serve for dinner?" to, "I'm gonna kill the king." Now, is that immediate jump to seeing hospitality as an opportunity for murder kind of extreme? Maybe. But let's take a little etymological journey, shall we? The two Latin roots of hospitality are hostess and potus. I speak Latin with a Rhode Island accent. Leave me alone. So we have potus, as in master of the house, the owner of the home. And this makes sense because in order for hospitality to take place, we need a person with authority over the space of hospitality, somebody who has mastery, who has the ability to control entrance, invitation, over the threshold. But our other root, hostess, gets a little bit more interesting because, for one thing, this can refer to both host and guest. And that starts to point us to how there is an element of reciprocity baked into our understanding of hospitality, that host and guest are deeply linked and kind of move back and forth in giving and receiving in relation to each other. But hostess is also the root not just of hospitality, but of hostility. Hospitality and hostility are branches off the same vine. Because hostess, as in guest, is also outsider, or to get a little bit more alienating, stranger, or to get even more threatening, enemy. And so just from the evolution of the word hospitality, we can see how there is this element of risk inherent in hospitality. Hospitality means bringing different people into close contact in the private, intimate space of the home. It means entering into unfamiliar territory as a guest, or it means bringing an unpredictable outsider into your space as a host. And so it's probably unsurprising that it is so common for us to see dysfunction or betrayal or violence occurring within hospitality in literature and honestly in history as well. Jacques Derrida lectured pretty substantially on the subject of hospitality. Is the entire purpose of getting a PhD to be able to say, in his lectures on the subject, Jacques Derrida, maybe it is. Anyway, in his lectures on the subject, Jacques Derrida uses a portmanteau, hospitality, in describing this to draw attention to just how intrinsically connected hostility and hospitality are. So with this context in place, doesn't it make a little bit more sense that Lady Macbeth so easily makes that mental jump from hospitality to regicide? The ambition is already fomenting inside of her. The gears are already turning in her head because she's just read Macbeth's letter about the prophecy that he will become king. And so when she receives the news that Duncan is coming, She has mastery over the space of the home. She understands the vulnerability that arises when people are joined together within a moment of hospitality. And so she sees it as an opportunity for political gain. I don't believe in the glorification of murder. I do believe in the empowerment of women. And this all brings us to Act 1, Scene 6. King Duncan arrives after we can only imagine that Lady Macbeth has spent the past several hours running around Inverness stressing out all of her domestic staff. And throughout this scene, as Duncan and the Macbeths are talking, King Duncan exclusively addresses Lady Macbeth by her title of hostess, as if he's talking not just to her, but to the archetypal role she's playing. He is cast as guest, and she is cast as hostess. And for her part, Lady Macbeth says, "All our service, in every point twice done, and then done double, were poor and single business to contend against those honors deep and broad, wherewith your majesty loads our house." And we've already talked about how for the original audiences of Macbeth, the hosting of the monarch would have been understood to have this deep political and social importance. But let's dig into even a little bit more historical depth on this. Hospitality has this enduring and almost universal significance across centuries, across continents, across cultures. There is a pretty consistent idea of what hospitality is, and there's a pretty consistent level of importance attached to correct practice of hospitality, whatever that means in the given historical or cultural context. But aside from that kind of universal through line, there are always historically and culturally contingent specificities to hospitality. In different times and in different places, hospitality carries different associations and different particulars. And in England, in the late 1500s, early 1600s, hospitality was not just something that you do privately in your home. It was not just a nice little practice of having dinner parties with people you knew. Instead, hospitality served a real social function. The nobility and the gentry were expected to provide hospitality to their surrounding communities. And what providing hospitality meant included providing lodging to passing travelers, providing charity to the poor and the itinerant, providing community entertainments during times of celebration and holiday. And in fact, during the reigns of the three successive monarchs who ruled during the late 16th, early 17th century, Elizabeth, James, and Charles, we get multiple royal proclamations asserting the importance of hospitality and specifically scolding the nobility and gentry for failing to uphold their responsibility of hospitality. Royal proclamations were almost like a cross between public announcements of policy and press releases. And so in these proclamations, you have the monarch scolding the nobility for being bad at doing hospitality, as it is their moral and social and political responsibility to do. Often these proclamations take place during the winter months or during periods of dearth or grain shortage, and the monarch is scolding the nobility in general for spending too much time in London having fun when they were supposed to be in their country estates, because these were times when the practice of hospitality in terms of charity and community support was the most important. An individual, a Macbeth or Lady Macbeth, may have mastery over their own homes and their own estates, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they get to choose when and how to practice hospitality in those homes and estates. Because even though they have mastery over their private spaces, the monarch has mastery over the wider space of the kingdom. It connects to this Christian idea that is very much in play in early modern English discourse, that a wife ought to submit to her husband as her husband, the head of the house, submits to the king, as the king submits to God. It's just a fun little Russian nesting doll of patriarchal authority. So to return back into Macbeth, into Act 1, Scene 6, King Duncan has arrived at Inverness. He is addressing Lady Macbeth as her title of hostess. She's telling him, even if all the work we did to prepare for you was done twice over and then twice over again, it would still never be enough. Even if we put to one side that in this moment, Lady Macbeth is harboring intentions of regicide, there would still be this political power maneuvering happening in this interaction. Lady Macbeth might be hostess in her home, but Duncan is host of everything in the country. In his reading of hospitality in Macbeth, which is a little too abstract and Heideggerian for my personal taste, but which is still very detailed and interesting and at times useful, Paul Cotman talks about this idea of the monarch as the host of the nation. He says that Duncan, or a figure like him, is the host/king from whom all hospitality extends. And even though I literally just got us back into Macbeth, I am once again going to lead us on another little digression and invite you to think about hospitality in terms of nation, on a national and really an international scale. If my bookshelf catches fire, it would be very dramatic and devastating, but visually beautiful. I think we're good. Think of it this way, okay? In order for hospitality to be happening, in order for us to classify a social interaction as a hospitable one, we need three things. We need a host with control over a space. We need an outsider who does not belong in that space. And of course, we need the space itself, which contains a threshold over which the outsider may pass at the invitation of the person who has mastery. Hospitality begins at the moment when a person with authority over a space invites the outsider to pass over that threshold into the space. So obviously this can apply to the home, right? I have authority over the house that I live in, and I issue an invitation to you who are an outsider because you do not live in my house, and you pass over the threshold of the door to enter into the space of my home. But this definition of hospitality can also apply to countries. The nation is the space within which hospitality occurs. The threshold is the border. The state has the authority to either issue or deny invitation across that border to people who are outsiders to the national space. And of course, I could really get into the idea of sinister hospitality and hospitality in connection to nation and betrayals between host and guest, state and outsider in regards to the current goings-on of the United States of America. But if I start talking about that, I'm going to end up rage drinking this entire bottle of Lambrusco, and I don't think that's a healthy choice for me right now, so I will not go on a tangent within my tangent, try not to get myself too worked up, and simply invite you, if you'd like, to consider such things on your own time. Anyway, there is a fair amount of critical scholarship out there that works with the idea of hospitality and nation, talking often about immigrations and refugees and post-colonial schools of thought, and pursuing that could lead me, again, to Derrida, but we're talking about Macbeth, and I don't want to talk about Derrida right now, and I'm not in grad school anymore, and so you can't make me. Oh my God, Carson, get yourself together. It's too feisty. I'm getting too feisty. That can be good. Did it catch on fire? Everything's fine. Everything's normal, good, and fine. For now, I will just say, first of all, that it's not even anachronistic for me to bring up this idea of hospitality in terms of nation in connection to an early modern English text. This was an idea that was in play in some early modern writing. And for another thing, just to say that even if we don't make too big of a deal of it, just understanding this dimension to hospitality allows us to think at a slightly different angle, or just in slightly more depth and nuance about what is happening in the moment when Duncan arrives at Inverness. And now we reach Act 1, Scene 7, because yeah, we haven't even made it into Act 2 yet. This scene opens with stage directions indicating that servants are passing over the stage carrying with them torches and dishes. Basically that as this scene opens, we are seeing silently the performance of the labor of hospitality, which means that in this moment, the work of hospitality and the work of stage production are the same, that the servants within the world of the play are the stagehands within the world of the audience watching the play, and both stagehands and servants are doing the same work, and that kind of distance between narrative world and real world is collapsed for a second, but I digress endlessly, it would seem. Anyway, when we are reading this play rather than watching it, it's important to take note of that stage direction and notice that this kind of choreography of the labor of hospitality is happening, because that is what visually contextualizes Macbeth's speech at the beginning of Act 1, Scene 7. In this moment, off stage, King Duncan is being entertained with what we can assume is a fairly lavish feast, and Macbeth has stepped away from that in order to reflect, because he is consumed with guilt and with second thoughts around the plan of regicide. And he says of Duncan, quote, "He's here in double trust. First, as I am his kinsman and his subject, strong both against the deed, then as his host, who should against his murderer shut the door and not bear the knife myself." Macbeth is agonizing over the multiple layers of his relationship with Duncan, all of which should mean that he would never harm Duncan. He is Duncan's relative, he is his subject, and he is his host. And all of these, each of these individually, but especially all of these together, mean that he's not meant to harm this man. You know, I've talked about the fact that hostility is embedded in our idea of hospitality, and that hospitality means people who are in some ways other from each other are coming into intimate contact, and that breeds anxiety and fear and potential for betrayal. But what that also means is that in order to participate in hospitality, you have to be placing trust in each other. And Macbeth is very aware of the fact that he is preying on Duncan's trust. And of course, it's a bit obvious to say that you shouldn't kill anyone who is your guest, because, you know, you really should try to avoid killing anyone as much as you can help it. Sometimes you can't help it, you know, sometimes we've got a goodbye Earl situation on our hands. But in general, I think that it's not too controversial to say that you just shouldn't kill people. But it's an especially extreme violation of trust to kill somebody who is your guest. There's a lot of writing out there, a lot of theory and philosophy around the idea of an ethics of hospitality. And this idea has very old roots. We can think, for example, about the Greek idea of xenia, which is maybe not how you pronounce it, but I don't speak ancient Greek, or any Greek for that matter. And this idea is basically that a host has a responsibility to provide welcome to the guest at their door before even asking any questions. In fact, sometimes before even asking the outsider at their door's name. And likewise, of course, it is the idea that the guest must respect the sanctity of their host's home. Somewhat similar to that is the Christian idea that you should always extend welcome to the stranger who appears at your door, because no matter how apparently humble, that stranger could be a divine figure in disguise. In both of these cases, we're not talking about ethical behavior within hospitality. We're talking about hospitality as an ethical obligation of a moral imperative to extend welcome to the stranger at your door, which can inform your morals and your actions in other contexts as well, that hospitality can serve as kind of a framework for how you understand your interactions with others. And like I said, this is an idea that gets picked up by a lot of theorists and philosophers. We see discussions of this in Levinas and in Kant and in Derrida. I cannot escape Derrida. We're talking about Derrida again. In his substantial writings and lectures on the subject of hospitality, Derrida talks quite a bit about an ethics of hospitality. And Derrida holds that not only is hospitality an ethical obligation, but that it is kind of the most fundamental distillation of relational ethics, that ideally all interactions between the self and the other should be hospitable. Ideally, we would make ourselves so open, so welcoming and vulnerable to the other that not only is our door always open, but that there is no door at all. Think about The Hobbit, the unexpected party. Bilbo Baggins is sitting at home enjoying a quiet dinner alone when he hears a knock on his door, and he opens it to see somebody he's never met before. But because this is a guest at his door, he opens the door and he invites in this stranger, and then another, until there's a baker's dozen of dwarves sitting at his table, eating all his food and drinking all his wine. Even though he doesn't know them, and even though he honestly doesn't want them there, he upholds his ethical obligation to extend hospitality to the stranger at his door. So Bilbo is kind of enacting a Derridian ideal of hospitality as moral imperative. But as I mentioned earlier, Derrida thinks a lot about what he calls hospitality, about how the threat of hostility, the awareness of a threatening vulnerability, is inherent in our idea and our practice of hospitality. And so he acknowledges that while this kind of radically open and accessible hospitality would be ideal, it is also practically impossible. People will never feel comfortable truly making themselves that vulnerable to a potentially threatening outsider. We're too aware of the risks involved in practicing this kind of hospitality to be able to bear to make ourselves that vulnerable. But if you're a person who attaches a lot of importance to the ethics of hospitality, then your own inability to live up to that ideal standard might cause you some anxiety. In the extreme case, you might become Macbeth, soliloquizing over your own internal struggle about the conflict between your desire to be a good host and your desire to usurp the throne. Lady Macbeth feels no such anxiety, no conflict. She comes into Act 1, Scene 7 to reprimand Macbeth because he is failing as a host even on just a normal polite level. Forget about all the schemings to kill the king. He's just being a bad host by stepping away from the banquet. He's being bad at being a normal host. He's being particularly bad at pretending to be a good host while secretly harboring intentions to kill the king. He's going to give the whole thing away. Lady Macbeth, on the other hand, is very good at being a regular hostess and also a secret murder hostess. She's very talented. I love her. I don't care. Everybody wants complex female characters until it's Carrie Bradshaw having an affair or Lady Macbeth plotting regicide. Grow up. People make mistakes. People contain multitudes. So we're finally in Act 2. Macbeth is going to kill the king. But wait, before we get into that, there is another tiny moment that I think reveals an additional layer of complexity to how hospitality is functioning within this play. Act 2, Scene 1 opens with a brief conversation between Macbeth and Banquo, who says to him, quote, "The king's abed. He hath been in unusual pleasure, and sent forth great largesse to your offices. This diamond he greets your wife withal, by name of most kind hostess, and shut up in measureless content." So once again, Duncan is referring to Lady Macbeth as the title of hostess, this time by proxy, and he's giving her a big old diamond. It's nice, right? Give a thank you gift to your host. But I want to use this moment in 2-1 to just briefly raise the idea of hospitality in connection with gift giving, hospitality as a system of exchange. People who talk about hospitality in connection with gift giving are always talking about this book, The Gift by Marcel Mauss. This is a 1925 cultural anthropology essay in which Mauss is talking about gift giving in what he calls archaic societies. And in it, he talks about how gift giving is used in order to build social bonds and alliances, in large part due to the idea of reciprocity involved in gift giving. When one person gives a gift to another, there are elements of generosity and gratitude involved that build goodwill between those people, and ideally this process is kind of cyclical. You know, I give you a birthday gift, you're gonna give me a birthday gift. Maybe we exchange Christmas gifts. Maybe I give you a gift this one time, you give me a gift at some point in the future. Even though one of us is giving something in the moment, there is at least a kind of back of the mind expectation that there will be some form of reciprocity at some point. And a lot of scholars working with hospitality point out that these ideas can be productively applied to considerations of hospitality as well, that hospitality can function in this way as a kind of gift giving. I host you at my house this time, and I know that next time I'm in your city, you will host me there. I have my friends over for dinner one night, maybe the next month, maybe a few months from now, they invite me over for dinner. Hospitality becomes this kind of system of mutual exchange that is binding us together. Now, to me, Duncan's gift of the diamond complicates that. Maybe on the surface, it's a straightforward gift exchange. Macbeth gives Duncan hospitality, Duncan gives Macbeth a diamond. But it's also this reminder that there can be no real reciprocity and really no real hospitality when the king is involved. And we've already seen some hints of that leading up to this moment. You know, we saw Lady Macbeth telling Duncan, even if all the work we did was done twice over and twice over again, it would still not measure up to what you are giving us just by coming into our home. And after Banquo has given Macbeth this diamond and said, you know, this is from Duncan in recognition of how well you have welcomed him into your home, Macbeth says, quote, "Being unprepared, our will became the servant to defect, which else should free have wrought." Which is to say, we could have done more if we'd had more time to prepare, but we were unprepared, and so as much as we wanted to do, we couldn't quite measure up to it. He's aware not only of his inability to practice ideal hospitality in general, but to live up to Duncan's generosity, and is aware that his position as host of the house will never be on the level of Duncan's position as host of the realm. So he takes the diamond and he goes and he kills Duncan. And in fact, he leaves to go kill Duncan because he hears the bell that Lady Macbeth is ringing to let him know that it's time to do the deed. And he says, quote, "The bell invites me." In a way, he's positioning himself now as a guest invited by Hostess of the Year, Lady Macbeth, to step forward and walk into his fate. Also, when he's on his way to go do the murder, Macbeth references Tarquin, who is the antagonist of the classic narrative of Lucrece. And Shakespeare's poem relaying that same story, called, of course, The Rape of Lucrece, is another of his works that is so centrally about hospitality that, in my opinion, you really can't talk about that text at all without talking about hospitality, and especially talking about the hostess. But I can't get into that right now because I can't just sit here and recite my entire dissertation at you, because you will get bored. You say you won't, but you will. I can see it in your eyes already. You're getting sick of this one video. You want to pause it. You want to go do something else. But in a way, aren't you my guest? Would you really be so rude as to abandon your hostess in the middle of her entertainment? No, you would not. Sit back down. We're going to talk about the porter. Don't you remember the porter? Act 2, Scene 2 gives us Lady Macbeth and Macbeth immediately after the murder has been committed. Lady Macbeth is freaking out because she has a spot of blood on her hands, and Macbeth is just freaking out in general. He's having a nervous breakdown. And the conversation they are having is punctuated intermittently by the sound of knocks on the door. We get the arrival of another guest in the middle of the night, interrupting the aftermath of their murder of their original guest. Act 2, Scene 3 opens with the continuation of that knocking, and we get a little scene with the drunken porter. Every time there's a stage direction indicating that there's another knock on the door, he calls back, "Knock, knock." And he's rambling meanwhile about he is the porter of the gates of hell. So in this moment, in the aftermath of Duncan's murder, we're kind of hovering at the threshold of hospitality. We are suspended in this liminal space after the guest has requested entry, but before they have been issued invitation into the home. And when the porter finally does answer the door, one of the guests seeking entry is Macduff, the man who will eventually kill Macbeth. Macduff is arriving in order to wake the king, and this of course leads to the discovery of the king's death, which leads to, chaos and despair and everyone running around telling each other the news. Somebody very gently breaks the news to Lady Macbeth because they don't want to offend her delicate sensibilities. And she says, "What? In our house?" She's so silly. After the discovery of Duncan's death, everyone is freaking out. Duncan's two sons are especially freaking out, afraid that they will either be next or will be blamed, so they flee the country and are therefore assumed guilty, and so Macbeth is named king. So as we go into Act 3, everything's really going according to plan for the Macbeths, but of course, it can't go on that way for long. We're approaching the really drastic breakdown of hospitality, the moment at which even the pretense of proper hospitality breaks down, and hospitality within the play just is entirely dysfunctional, entirely sinister. Act 3 opens with Banquo alone on the stage, soliloquizing about his increasing suspicions around the death of Duncan and Macbeth's accession to the throne. Right after he voices his concerns to us, the audience, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth enter the stage, and they address Banquo as chief guest because they are having a banquet and they want to make sure that he's there, which is like not the biggest compliment for somebody who's pretty sure he knows what happened to the last chief guest to sit at a Macbeth banquet. Banquo decides that he needs to make a break for it and run away with his son, and Macbeth decides that Banquo and his son need to die, so he hires some murderers to carry out the deed. And he does this not only without consulting his wife, but while intentionally excluding her from these decisions. In Act 3, Scene 2, Lady Macbeth reminds Macbeth of how important it is for them to appear as the perfect host and hostess at this upcoming banquet in order to impress their nobles and solidify those political and social bonds. And she also asks him what's going on with Banquo, and he says, "Don't worry about it, babe. I've got this covered," which, need I remind you, Macbeth, who the mastermind this whole time has been. You are not as good at hospitality and you are not as good at murder. You gotta let your wife help you out with both those things. His fatal flaw is not political ambition, it is poor communication with his wife. Act 3, Scene 4 gives us the infamous Banquo banquet. Macbeth opens this banquet by telling his guests, "You know where to sit according to your station, so go on and seat yourselves, and let's begin." Then he goes off to the side to consult with one of his murderers, who lets him know that while Banquo was killed, Banquo's son escaped. And this is not good news for Macbeth's mental state, and really not good news for Lady Macbeth's state dinner. Just like in Act 1, when Macbeth left the banquet being held in Duncan's honor and Lady Macbeth had to come and remind him that he was failing in his duties as host, she here in Act 3 has to tell him, "Hey, you're being a bad host. Why don't you join us and sit down? You do not give the cheer." Unfortunately, when Macbeth goes to try to sit down, he sees that his seat has been taken by the ghost of Banquo, which only he can see. And he freaks out, as you might expect, and so this launches us into the world's worst dinner party. Lady Macbeth is desperately trying to get her husband to behave and to reassure her guests that there's nothing to worry about, and Macbeth is oscillating wildly between saying, "Oh, don't worry about it, these are just these little fits I have every now and then," and yelling at a ghost that only he can see about murders that nobody else knows he's committed. This goes on for an uncomfortable amount of time until finally the ghost of Banquo leaves and Macbeth says, "Okay, I'm good, let's sit down, let's eat and enjoy ourselves." But Lady Macbeth, accurately reading the room, says, "It's too late for that. You have displaced the mirth, you have killed the vibe, the party's over." She tells the guests to go at once and not leave according to their station. So from the orderly procession in at the beginning of the banquet where the nobles sit according to rank to dine with their king, we now have this chaotic mass exodus where everyone politically important to the Macbeths is just running away, knowing now that their king is unstable and that something is very wrong in the Macbeth home. And when Macbeth and Lady Macbeth leave at the end of Act 3, Scene 4, it's the last time we see them on stage together. And then from there, it's really all over and everything just unravels at a faster and faster pace. The king's exiled sons are compiling forces to rise up against Macbeth. Macbeth decides to kill Macduff's family. "What, you egg? Lady Macbeth is sleepwalking and ranting about the murders, convinced that she can hear knocking at the door and that there's a spot of blood on her hand left over from the murders that she compulsively tries to wash off. Birnam Wood marches on Dunsinane, Lady Macbeth dies, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps through this petty pace from day to day. Macduff and Macbeth meet on the battlefield and they fight, and it turns out Macduff was born from a C-section, and so he kills Macbeth, and then he enters on stage carrying Macbeth's head with him. Duncan's son, Malcolm, will now be the king. He will call his exiled allies back home. And the final line of the play is Malcolm inviting all the present nobles to his coronation. The rightful king is once again reinstated on the throne and in his position as host. Truly, from the very beginning to the very end, this play is so much about hospitality and about the sinister capacity for hospitality, the potential for hospitality to devolve into hostility. And one of the things that I most enjoy thinking about with this play is how Macbeth failed to understand what Lady Macbeth knew to be true about hospitality, which is that hospitality is always theater. It is a performance. People are cast into their roles and they play their parts, and the home becomes the stage. And of course, to say that something is a performance is to say that it is, at least to some degree, false. Whether that falseness is just pretending that you don't mind that your guest has lingered so long after dinner, or pretending that the food that your host served you is very good actually, or whether, in a more extreme case, the pretense is veiling your underlying intentions to murder your guest. And I find it so interesting to think about hospitality and theater in connection with each other, because this connection goes both ways. In the same way that the home is theatrical, the theater is hospitable. Once again, we have outsiders entering into a space where they are served up entertainment. I mentioned in talking about Act 1, Scene 7, how there's that little moment of a stage direction indicating that servants are passing over the stage carrying torches and plates, that there is this brief moment where the work of stagehands within the audience's experience and the work of servants within the fictional world of Macbeth is the same. And I just love that moment of collapse between the work of hospitality and the work of theater, where in both cases, a show is being put on. Much like how I, in this moment, am putting on a little bit of theatrical hospitality or hospitable theater. I've done some set design. I've put myself in a costume. I've moved the mess behind the camera so that you think that my home always looks like this, and I'm always prepared to receive guests for intellectual conversation by candlelight. If you are my guest and I am your hostess, then like any good hostess, I should know when to call the party over. So I will say, you are free to go now. Thank you for coming. Come again soon. Thank you for responding to my invitation in the form of clicking on this video, and I hope you were entertained.